Currently I am printing the center foot shell using some red transparent filament. I'm not sure if I have enough to finish it. It's gonna be close. I believe it's a 30-hour total print. I'm 22 hours into it. I added support pieces to the model here and used helper discs on all four corners that touch the print bed. Upside down is what they say is the way to print it. I had some major issues with this printer finally. Day after I was telling my friend that this printer's been more reliable than my Prusa, I started having problems. So what it turned out to be was a couple things. I was getting a lot of clicking in the extruder, and it wasn't extruding the filament properly. That turned out to be this Titan extruder, Tevo's copy of the Titan extruder. This bolt here goes through a bearing and then a round gear that's spun by the motor that has the toothed gear that pulls the filament through, and then there's another bearing underneath it, and the lower bearing had completely ground itself into multiple pieces. I basically think it's just because I put so many hours on this printing the R2D2 parts that it just finally gave up. So I think in my last video I might have talked about the point that I put an Allen wrench in here with some painter's tape to hold it in place because the bolt just wanted to unscrew itself. So that had to do with the fact that the lower bearing was completely gone, so the thing was at an angle. And yeah, so I made it through the 40-hour print and then took this apart, found that problem. It takes like 3 weeks to get a Tevo extruder and the stepper motor that sits underneath it that runs it. Instead I decided to get just a different clone of the Titan extruder that looks almost exactly the same. And when that one arrived, I didn't like the toothed wheel that spins and pulls the filament through. It didn't spin smoothly, and I could see that the teeth weren't cleanly cut on it. So basically all I did was remove the bearings from it and replace obviously the one that was completely destroyed, and also the one that was in the top that still seemed to be a good bearing, but I just thought, well, might as well just replace them both with brand new bearings. And then I put thread locker on this bolt, which was a piece I think I was missing, because when you screw this in and it goes down into the stepper motor, if you do it too tight, then there's too much pressure on the wheel. It doesn't spin freely. If it's too loose, then as it spins, the bolt backs out. So I remembered looking at the actual Titan extruder. It comes with bolts that have blue on the ends of it, and that's some kind of a thread lock material. So I put some blue thread lock on the bolt here that goes into the motor and got it just to the right point where it was the wheel was still able to spin freely, and left it overnight for the Loctite to or Permatex I think I was using, but for the thread locker to secure it in there so it doesn't have to be super tight, and the thread locker should still keep it from backing out. So I replaced that, and I thought I was in business, and I tried printing something and it still didn't extrude properly. And that's when I took a look at no, that's not the case. It still seemed to be, I seemed to have to crank it really tight, the spring tension, to get it to pull the filament through, but it was working. So I started printing a battery box part, and went away for a couple hours, and when I came back, the Bowden tube here had pulled out and filament was all strung all over the print area, because it had, instead of going down the Bowden tube, it started winding around on the floor. So that turned out to be the Bowden tube right here. There's a little collar that you pull out, and it locks the Bowden tube in so it can't be pulled out. And just from use, you can see it kind of moves with the wires. The Bowden tube on both ends has that same fitting. And so as this whole mechanism moves back and forth, there's a little bit of flex and movement in that tube. So it was pinched around there and almost cut through where it was moving. Down on this side, it was even worse, where it was practically cut through. And then the Bowden tube goes down into the heat break, and eventually I had to get it out, I had to turn the printer on and heat up the nozzle, and then use some pliers to yank it out. And the Bowden tube was actually kind of melted at the bottom, so that it was also smaller than the proper diameter. So my theory is that I've put so many hours on it printing this R2D2 that I basically wore out the Bowden tube, so it was pinching filament here, slightly pinching filament here, slightly pinching it where the Bowden tube gets down into the heat break. That meant that there was too much tension, so when the gear was trying to push the filament down the tube, it wasn't able to do it because there was too much pressure. So that's why I had to keep tightening the spring, and the spring load against the wheel is probably what ended up grinding out the bearing. And that's my theory on what happened. So I replaced the bearings, I replaced the Bowden tube. After I pulled the Bowden tube out, there were bits of PTFE inside the hot end. Tried to pick them all out with tweezers as much as I can, but I knew that some of it must have gotten down further into the heat break. So I tried to extrude filament, and it wasn't coming out, so I ended up taking the nozzle off and then extruding filament, and it definitely, the first bunch of filament that came out looked bad, looked like it had foreign matter in it, kind of burnt and just discolored. So I ran some filament through with the nozzle off, and then I turned the printer. I got a Q-tip and I put it up in the heat block with a Q-tip and twisted around to get any plastic off the threads I could. I read about that online. I did it with my Prusa and it seemed to work. Then I cooled down the printer, turned it off, put a new nozzle on, heated it up because you want to tighten the nozzle when it's got temperature. Tightened that nozzle up, and then went back to the controls, extruded filament through the nozzle, the new nozzle, and it was coming out great. So I think it was a combination of the Bowden tube wearing out, which contributed or led to the extruder wearing out, and then the nozzle, they're cheap enough that rather than try and clean it, because it had so much filament run through it, I figured I might as well replace it as well. And I hate to say knock on wood, because that's what I said when I told my friend that this printer was working great, but oh, but I didn't actually knock on wood then, so knock on some wood here, that now this printer is going to behave for what I've got left. As far as what I've got left to print, the main things I have to print are this foot shell here for the center leg, which is a one-piece print, obviously. And then the left and right foot shells, those have to be printed in multiple pieces because they won't fit on this print bed. You can see this one is close, because the actual print area is not all the way to the edge of the build plate here. It's 300 millimeters, so it's somewhere around here. So this foot is, pretty soon it'll stop coming out this direction and it'll start building up when it does the lip that goes around, runs around it. So yeah, left and right foot shells, broken into 2 big pieces, and then there's 2 smaller pieces also, so it's like a 4-piece assembly that you glue together to make each foot shell. Those are the only big parts that I have to print. There's some little stuff. Most of it is to do with the drive units. I haven't decided if I'm going to print Omni wheels. Those are the wheels that go on the drive units that the droid sits on. They're called Omni wheels because they go both, say, north-south and east-west, right? They can go in any direction. And you can print those yourself, or you can buy them from a robotics place that sells them. And the person who designed the support for the purchased ones, it's a different support structure than it is for the ones you print yourself. So without knowing which one I'm going to do, I don't know which frame to print for them to fit on. And so those shouldn't be, those are about the same size as the frames, the drive units that I printed on the Prusa. So they're not big prints, they're less than 200 millimeters. So they can fit on the Prusa or on the Tevo. They should be printed in PETG, which I have not tried on the Tevo because I wanted to get all of the big parts in PLA and PLA Plus that I had to do done before I risked messing up the Tevo Tornado. So after I get done with the left and right foot shells, then I can try, if I want to, PETG on this printer. Why would I want to do that? Because I still have a warping problem on the Prusa, where any print that takes about 2 hours or more in PETG warps off my bed, even with helper discs, brim, and painter's tape holding all that down. It still warps off the textured PEI sheet. Now I did buy a different PEI sheet online that people recommended, and I printed some small PETG pieces a couple days ago, and they printed great, but they were only like half-hour prints to about, I think, an hour. So, and multiple small items, not anything big, not a single piece that had a lot of surface area for me to see if that different PEI sheet would change the warping issue that I have. So I was going to try hairspray on this glass bed with PETG on this printer, but again, not until I got all the parts printed that are really large pieces that will not fit on the Prusa. I'm going to have to order filament. I am getting right down to the end of printing and getting to the end of my filament. This foot here, I believe, uses, was it 800 grams of filament, so 80% of a spool, and this spool had about 70 to 80% left on it. I didn't weigh it, I probably should have. So the transparent red, I should either completely use up and need just a little bit of something else, or it'll just barely be enough to finish this. What I have left is a full spool of clear PLA. So both Xyltech, both ones that I got with this printer when I bought this printer. So if this runs out and needs some more, I will be printing the clear on top of this to finish this piece. The feet for the left and right, I want to say that those use about a spool. I'm not sure if it's a little bit more than a spool or a little bit less than the spool, but all 4 parts together I think use around a spool, and that's with 15% infill because these are not load bearing. The frames that the wheels and the drive units drive on have the load on them, and these are foot shells because they cover the actual drive units, so they don't actually have the weight of the droid on them. So I also have almost one roll of PLA Plus, the white PLA Plus that I was printing ankles and the support plates with, the hubs, things like that. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, if I want to just order one more roll of the PLA Plus, or 2 rolls to be safe, and then do the 2 outer feet in PLA Plus, or if I want to use up, like I said, I've got the clear PLA, so I could try doing 1 foot in clear PLA, and then the other foot with the PLA Plus that I have, which is not a full spool, so it might not be enough, so then I'd buy 1 spool of PLA Plus to make sure that I got the rest of that foot printed in PLA Plus. So I'm just close enough where I'm not sure what to do. And then there's, like I said, the other parts of the drive unit once I figure out what I'm going to do there. I have, I think, 3/4 of a spool of PETG, but if I get warping problems and whichever version of the drive units I choose to print, if I have problems printing that, then I'll just switch over to PLA Plus to be able to get it printed. But I definitely don't have enough of that, so again, it's 1 or 2 spools of PLA Plus that I should order, and that should get me both left and right foot shells, and I should have about at least half a spool of PLA Plus left, plus the full spool of clear, unless this uses some of the clear. So just at that annoying point where I'm not sure yet what to order for filament to do the last few parts, which I should get on actually as I look at this, which is at least 2/3 of the way done. I should be thinking about that and ordering that now, because once this finishes, yeah, my only option is going to be start printing the left and right feet in clear, because that's the only thing I'm going to have left other than the 1 near full spool of PLA Plus, which now that I think about it, I know there's enough to do the 2 large pieces of one of the foot shells in the PLA Plus that I have. So I think that's what I'm going to do, is just order a couple more spools of the white PLA Plus, and then that should be all I need to order for filament. So that's what's printing. I haven't done much else other than printing. Here is the skirt and the first ring, and then that container has the body ring 2, body ring 3. This container is all leg pieces. It has the legs, the battery boxes, the booster covers, all the greebles for the legs. This plastic container is center leg. Those are the ankles for the center leg, greebles for the center leg. It has a couple boxes that have some parts for their left and right leg, the drive chain parts. That is the top ring. I just printed that this week. Parts A, B, C, D, and E that make up the top ring. This flat ring goes on top of the body. Not to be confused with the dome that has an upper ring and a lower ring. I have printed the upper ring of the dome. I have not glued it together. I have not printed the lower ring of the dome because I wanted to wait to know for sure which Lazy Susan I get, because there's different lower rings depending on the dimensions of your Lazy Susan. So I did just yesterday order the Granite Earth Lazy Susan. It seems to be one that a lot of people order, and it's supposedly pre-drilled, so you don't have to do the drilling of it yourself. So I will need to do, the gears, the dome gears. I have not printed those. They barely fit on the Prusa, so that's something that I would like to try in PETG on the Tevo. And then we move up to here, and this has got, in there is one of the drive chain parts, the large PETG part that holds the drive gears and the wheels. Also in here are the shoulders and the hubs. My last video of putting the hubs and the shoulders together, those are in there. The center ankle support piece is in there. The orange parts are the upper ring for the dome. And there's some doors in there, some other miscellaneous stuff in there. So yeah, 4 plastic containers plus these loose pieces, plus obviously these these feet are not. The other thing I printed, battery box and cover. Battery box cover. Battery box cover is proving to be an issue. Battery box cover has holes in it that are threaded. Some of the greebles that attach to the front of the battery box, the two that go through these holes, screw in. They're also threaded. And when I printed these, the support material I could not get out. Cut my finger with a hobby knife trying to get them out. There's also some extra up top and down there that wouldn't come out. I printed it on its side, so the support material filled this entire area. And it was just a real pain trying to get the support material out. So after printing this, which is done in some marble filament I had, because I'm down to the end of my filament, I decided to take it into Mesh Mixer. Saw somebody on the Facebook group recommend why not split the file. So I did. I split the file right here where it's flat. So that's one piece, and then the other one prints like this. And then when you're done, you just have an extra gluing step to glue the two together. And it's just like the one piece. So I did that. This one I printed on the Tevo Tornado, and it took a while to get the support structure out of there. Maybe 15 minutes, but at least I got it out. The next one I printed on the Prusa, and it took less than 5 minutes to get the support material out. So the Prusa there's something about it, the way it's dialed in or whatever, that printing with the same specs, the same model, the support material just seems to work better on the Prusa. Now, saying that, after this one here with the just supports that are so fused in there to the threads that I haven't been able to get it out, and support material in here that's just really stuck in there. When I tried to print with this same marble the second one of these that I split, I was printing the bottom piece when the printer totally failed, and that's when I had filament all over the place and ended up having to replace the bearings in the extruder, replace the bowden tube, and replace the nozzle. So perhaps the nozzle was worn out, and the problem with the extruder and the bowden tube was just really messing up the flow of the filament. There are a couple lines in here I can see on this full one that I printed on the Tevo that look under extruded. So maybe that's part of why the support material was so bad on the Tevo, is that the nozzle, maybe extrusion was messed up and it was too thick or something. I don't know, but after slicing in half, I was able to get it to work fine. And also on the Prusa I printed, these are all the greebles that go on here. A lot of them are, well, a few of them need to be glued together multi-part. Some of them are threaded. These round threaded bits are the ones that screw into there, and these go on top, and the braided hoses come out of there. So that was one of the things that I got done this week that took both printers to do. And so yes, now, as I said before, I am pretty much done with printing. Just those left and right foot shells are the main things I have to worry about, and then the stuff that's left, apart from the dome gear and lower ring, those are multi-part files, and the dome gear should be printed in PETG, which I don't really want to do on the Prusa. I want to try that on the Tevo. So apart from those, everything else that needs to be printed is fairly small. And then after that, it'll be gluing things together and sanding at the very least, and like I said, probably be able to do Bondo. Just keep the container in the house so it's room temperature, and go outside to mix it up and put it on the parts, and then put the part maybe in the garage to dry. So that's where I'm at this week.